Welcome everybody to the continuation of our conclusion. And like I promised, I will give you the list of some of the First Nations and the indigenous cultures that were culturally invaded by the white culture. Now, let me start with the brief history of the English, or the West. And according to Stevenson, who wrote in 1998 in his book The World of Words, he claims that by the fourth century AD, English did not exist. Fourth century AD, English did not exist. So who lived in what we call England today, the English land? Who lived there? So the people who lived there were a community called the Celts, and that's why we have Celtic in Europe, and we have Celtic in America, because they migrated to America. We have the original people who were called the Brets, hence the word British. They were called the Brets. Then we have the Welsh. That's why we have Wales. We have the Gaelic. These are the communities that lived in present-day British Empire. And so, how did the English language came about, or culture? Remember, like I said, the English culture is very recent, all right? And so there were the people who immigrated and invaded these four communities that lived in today's British Empire included the Jutes, all right? So the Jutes invaded in the 5th century CE alongside the Angels, or the Angles, sorry, the Angles, and the Saxons, who will later form a nation called Germany, all right? And so they invaded the Celts, or the Celts. And of course, again, we heard from the Scandinavians, the Vikings, who invaded the same area. And finally, when a community was formed with a sense of nationalism by around the 10th century. In the 11th century, the French invaded these immigrants and the natives of the British Empire. Now, they did that through the blessing of Pope Gregory. And when they settled there, so the English language started to form at around 11th to 12th century. And so this is an amalgamation of almost 50 languages that contributed to the vocabularies that form the English language then. So today the English language continues to borrow from other cultures, even though it does cultural invasions. And the English language has managed to fix itself in aviation, in science, technology, tourism, diplomacy, pop culture, and businesses. It has become the language, or the lingua franca of today. This was made possible through the missionary activities, through the Bible societies of England and elsewhere. So it almost became the language of spreading the Christian religion and the gospel. And of course, that's why you'll find most of the people today who believe that they are saved wear suit and tie, which is an English culture or a European culture, to really give them the psychological feeling that they're close to God. And sometimes they even don't pray in our local languages. They pray in English so that God can be able to hear them. So it is really an identity crisis that was sold to the African and other global South members of those societies. Now, another thing that really pushed the English language is the Industrial Revolution. And of course, earlier to that was slavery, which pushed even other European languages to areas where they used to do the slave trade. Colonialism also is another thing, and of course, what has made the postmodern global community to be conversant with English is actually the internet. And so English has continued to really marginalize other cultures economically and culturally. And it continues, and this is what we're talking about, the cultural imperialism or cultural invasion, which the Americans call the cultural clash or clash of cultures. Now, of course, the Europeans began migrating in the 15th century after their nationalism to other areas, other continents, like in Africa and in Asia, in Latin America, and so on and so forth. Now, in Australia, of course, we know the history. The Aborigines migrated to Australia from Southern Asia 40,000 years ago, but the white community was brought by the British Empire in 1788, and most of them were convicts. And so the convicts, the captains, the crew who were in the 18 ships, and of course the prison wardens settled in Australia. And today Australia is white. This is what we are talking about. You find the people who are naturally there for very many years with a very long history, but your history comes and takes over and becomes the history of that part of the world. And this was all made possible by Captain Cook. So other areas that were invaded include the New Zealand, where there were very many tribes, which includes other islands where we have the Fiji, the Samoans, the Tahitis, and of course you go all the way to America, in some of the American islands where you'll find people like the Hawaiians or Hawaiians, and of course a lot of other communities that were invaded in other areas in Africa, in Asia, and Latin America. And so you will find that in Canada we have the natives who were invaded and Canada was taken away from them. But what is really surprising is that the natives of America, because America does not even have a national language today, and all immigrants from Europe live in America and Asia. They migrated to America, and also from Africa migrated to America. And this made it possible. And until recently, Americans used dual languages. And of course, these dual languages did not really make them in every state had their own language. Some of the language that was spoken in different states in America include the French, the Hebrew, the German, the Greek language, and of course the Dutch language. And of course, what the first state to legalize or to make English an official language was Arizona, and it had a policy of one language, English, and so it spread to other bilingual states, which were around 20 of them after Arizona, and so they continued really taking over the First Nations or indigenous people and converting them through English. That became the new language of American colonialism. And of course, the Hawaiians in the Niihau Island were the first culprits. Their language was banned in schools. Their language was banned in public. The Mohawks of Canada, and of course the Aha Punano Leo community. Their languages were banned in public. Their schools were closed by these English governments in America, the states, the federal states, and of course other small indigenous communities like the Red Indians, the Navajo, the Western Apache, the Hopi, the Zuni, the Crow, the Cheyenne, the Meskwaki, the Tingit, the Passamaquoddy, the Wanebango, the Comanche, the Nez Pass, the Nez Perce, Yakina, Eyak, the Pawnee, the Wachita, the Omaha, the Iroquois, and the Washoe. These are some of the American natives that have been suppressed and oppressed today. And of course, by migrants who have developed laws to block other migrants from benefiting from what they benefited from the natives. Actually, if democracy and human rights really work and should work, the English culture or the white man's culture should not prevail, because anyway they have made it possible that their language is a lingua franca, just like the Greeks did, and of course the Italians, or if you like, the Romans, through the Roman Empire, did in the then world. And so it is really a culture. The white man's culture is a culture of taking from others and suppressing others for them to thrive, which is actually, that's why their culture is limited to individualism. And so you will find that also in a place like Japan, though there is no much sense of Japanese colonialism, but for them they colonized the other neighboring countries, like including China. But the original indigenous people in Japan are called the Ainu community. And so even for them, they are suppressed today. And of course, Buddhism has taken over, just like in many other places where Christianity, Islam has also taken over and changed the culture of the people. You'll also find that in other areas, like for example, you'll find in Bolivia, you'll find the people who are called the Aymara Indians. Of course, they were suppressed. There was because they also had the system of how they organized the society through a clan group. They did not have an individual president or a chief, so they had a clan that was called the Ailas, which really had really do election even today. Once they were instated and the ban was lifted, this governing system was restored by the Bolivian white government. And of course, it is similar to what we had among the Kikuyus. We had the Rika leadership. We used to call it generational leadership. And we had the Mwangi and the Irongo. So they used to interchange, and the process of interchanging was called Itweka, meaning that this generation has become old, and so they need to leave the next young generation to take over in the next few years, between 20 to 30 years, for them to also lead. And so it was not an individualistic society. And so that's why people conformed to what was the prevailing or the dominant cultural trait. And of course, this is likened to what we see even today. It has been reinstated in a country like Botswana. They used to have village council that is called the Kongolta. So, I mean, all these are ideas that can be repicked by our national states, so that at least the white supremacist imperialism does not take over everything. And so a lot of other people who have been suppressed include people like, for example, the Hong people or the Hmong people who have been chased from China to Russia to all over. And so the Hong people, sometimes they're called the Motang Nads people. And of course the Ayumien who left Laos. Other people who have been suppressed are the Cambodians, the Vietnamese, and of course the English culture targets the cultural pattern of every community. They send people study through the ethnographic study and ethnographic studies. They stay among people, they understand the language, they understand the pattern, the meaning, the values, and so they target food, music, festival, the economic activities, though not monetary, the family institution, the religious institution, through rituals, beliefs, their marriage institutions, and so on and so forth. These are the targets that the white supremacy targets. So other people who have been targeted in Latin America, including the Mayas, the Aztec, and of course in Asia, the Taiwanese aborigines, whom even today the Chinese believe that they belong to them. But these are individual people, and unfortunately, or ironically, America is defending them, while America suppressed the real Americans. And so the government of America plays a lot of double standards, including most of the European governments. And you will find, like, for example, in Paraguay, the government suppressed the Garans. Paraguay is a white government today. And of course, in Europe, in a place like in Spain, the original people are called the Sami. And of course, the Sami had spread all through to Finland and Sweden, and they have been suppressed for a very long time by the white governments that took over. And of course, in Spain, Spanish, in Mexico, we have the Zapatista community that was suppressed. And of course, in Texas, in America, the original people in Texas were called the Tijanos. So the Tijanos are the original people, and they were suppressed. And so you'll find in other, like New Zealand and other islands, you'll find that the Maori, whom their land was called New Zealand, but initially the original name was Aotearoa. Aotearoa. So Aotearoa was the original name, just like our Lake Victoria was originally called Namlole. Just like our lakes in East Africa were called Nyanza by the community around them, regardless of the differences of ethnic languages and dialects, but they settled for one name, Nyanza. And of course, other people who have been suppressed in New Zealand include the iwi or the hapu. And of course, the hapu people were people who have been able to protect themselves um, through a genealogy that they call the Ngai Tahuiwi. And of course, they have how they look at the genealogy. To them, the genealogy is called Wakapapa. And so they read the Wakapapa and they are able to know uh, where do I belong, what is my origin, and so on and so forth. And of course, the other community that owned the south lands, the islands, the south that were called the crown, that were claimed by the queen or the crown of Europe, of Britain, include the Kamatua, who again had their own governing council that was called the Ruaga. And of course, for them, they have a name of how they keep these in the schools. They teach their languages, though a lot of interest is being lost by the young generation. But at least they have the ahika, which lights the fire. In Kenya, we have the local dialect media, and of course they keep on the banning because the indigenous languages were banned from schools. Personally, I don't really, I'm studying my indigenous language as a mature person. And so it is actually really disenfranchising people. And a lot of people are victims of identity crisis. And I hope while we're looking at the LGBTQI, all these background are able to make us look at it positively and be able to argue as we look forward into our history how we are going to live with this kind of cultural invasion and imperialism. So thank you so much for listening to me. I'll be coming shortly with the final word. Thank you so much. Be peaceful. Let us live as one. Let us unite and let us discuss this soberly.